back to this Monday, April 2nd edition of Infowars Nightly News. Last Friday, we wrote an article that got linked on the Drudge Report and it also got picked up in literally hundreds of publications. Climate change skeptics are mentally ill and are in need of treatment, I guess re-education. It's not the first time we've heard things like this. We've also seen newspapers call for the arrest of people that don't believe in man-made global warming. We've seen calls for rationing our society. We've seen calls for violence against people who dare even question. Now, at first, they said that there was absolute consensus by every scientist on Earth that A, global warming was happening, and B, it was man-made. Now they admit that they've basically engaged in a bunch of fraud, but still it's for the betterment of establishing their global government. Now, there's nobody out there who can chronicle all of their dangerous activities like Mark Morano of ClimateDepot.com, the premier site that chronicles all of this information. And whereas we can laugh at these authoritarians, and sometimes it's funny how openly authoritarian they are, we see it as a joke because we love liberty. Listen, they've got the backing of the power structure, as Mark was pointing out to me here when we were during the break about to come back. And so I want him to elaborate on that, because she isn't just one kook saying this. There's so many examples of governments and academics saying this, that this is the move. They want, quote, green fascism. They've said, well, the public's not listening. We've got to have green fascism. So this is the new authoritarianism. This is the major push by academics, government minions, corrupt corporations. This is the global power grab. They want a global tax. Durbin set that up. And Mark Morano of ClimateDepot.com is here to break down Professor Carrie Norgaard, who is running around the world saying that we need to basically be locked up. Mark, thanks for coming on short notice on this. This story's gotten a lot of traction. Why is it getting more attention than the hundreds of other professors basically saying the same thing?
Well, this is a lady, she's actually at a big conference in London right now with other sort of globalists discussing global warming and environment and how they're going to be essentially trying to move us toward a global governance in the world. This is a big, major paper that this Carrie Norgaard has presented. And what she's saying is we need to identify the conservatives, that essentially there's something wrong with our brains and that we need treatment. And this is being neatly compared to, obviously, Stalin, who used to accuse his political opponents of being mentally ill. And we don't know exactly what kind of treatment Carrie Norgaard is proposing, but we do know that Professor Lau of New York University is now coming out and talking about human engineering. This was just a paper from a few weeks prior to her paper. And this follows on a book by a guy named Chris Mooney called The Republican Brain, the conservative brain. He's now looking other mainstream global warming guys who are involved with science bodies in Washington, D.C. that are now being politicized. They're looking at our brains and conservative brains and saying there's something wrong here, and they're trying to analyze it. We actually have a new study out saying that conservatism in general is linked to low brain power. This has all been in the last month, Alex, all these new studies coming out. It's as though the left has decided now to formally and officially transition to saying that if you don't agree with them, we're all mental defectives. And that is where this is going. And this isn't hyperbole, this isn't alarmism. We now have academic papers accepted in peer-reviewed journals by professors at major universities, presented at major international conferences. This is a frightening time that we're living in.
And Mark, words cannot describe it. I mean, how bizarre it is. She says it's racism. I know the EU and England are saying climate denial is Holocaust denial, and they just bring race into it. I remember Obama's people saying, if you're not for government Obamacare, you're racist. I remember seeing a bunch of the different hosts on MSNBC, like Chris Matthews and others. And to someone who is sane, it makes no sense, but they're purely trying to punch buttons and behaving like they're God. They sit up on the mountain and they tell us what we can and can't believe. And they're now having the psychological publications come out and say that you're mentally ill if you don't believe in this. They're really trying to set the stage like Stalin did, arresting his detractors and putting them in mental institutions. Do you think this is going to discredit them, or does that matter because they've got the power structure behind them?
No, they do. And we may sit here and laugh at someone like Professor Norgard, but Al Gore has made very similar accusations that global warming skeptics are likened to anyone who opposed, civil rights in the 1960s for black people. We have, people at Grist Magazine, a major environmental publication, saying that global warming skeptics need Nuremberg-style trials for, quote, the bastards, for us not allowing, quote, solutions to man-made global warming, openly comparing us to Nazis that we need to be persecuted like they did in Nuremberg, in the Nuremberg trials. We have NASA's lead scientists saying it's crimes against humanity, the idea that we're not fighting global warming. We have RFK Jr., who's come out and said global warming skeptics are traitors and treasonous. And this goes on and on. We have state climatologists who are fired because they don't toe the line on this. We have UN scientists who've resigned in disgust. They do not allow dissent. And we've known that for years. But what the new development here is, and it's really getting creepy. It is much deeper than we can even scratch the surface here. We have people like Professor Stephen Running who come out and identified the 5 stages of grief, why global warming skeptics don't accept global warming, that essentially we're in the denial stage because it's such an overwhelming problem. We refuse to accept that life as we know it is coming to an end. They've all put on their amateur psychiatric boxes, and they're now going after our brains. And they're now openly advocating human engineering, shrinking us, psychiatric drugs for us. This is what Stephen Lau, professor from SUNY State University of New York, their university are coming out and proposing psychiatric drugs so that we won't want to eat meat. And now, of course, we have this Professor Norgard calling for treatment. This is now, I can't even put words on this because the comparisons are so obvious. My headline at Climate Depot has it up there. Nazis, Stalin. I mean, I don't like to throw those historical comparisons around, but there's really nothing short of that is appropriate here.
That's who did it. The communist Chinese, the communist Russians, the Nazis all used the psychiatrist.
Here, the issue is the fact that she has elected herself the ability to recognize us mental defects, people who don't believe global warming is human-caused and a major threat to our planet, and the fact that she thinks we need treatment. Her university, University of Oregon, could not be prouder of her. They issued a breathless press release on this, on her new study. So no, this is just pure excitement.
It's wonderful. People that want to actually have peer-reviewed science and people that don't like forged documents are evil. Put them in a psychiatric facility.
There's a new study. You probably remember this from Al Gore's. Al Gore's producer, Lori David, did the children's book that showed showed CO2 leading temperature, exactly opposite of what all ice core data has shown. It's actually temperature goes up and then CO2 follows. Well, now a new study is coming out. They've got rid of the medieval warm period years ago. In fact, it was called the inconvenient medieval warm period. They had to get rid of it. Now they deny its existence, the global warmers. Now they're coming out with a new study reversing that trend, and they're going to claim in the ice core that the new historical data shows that CO2 now leads temperature. They've gone back. They're monkeying with more of the data now, and they've also gone back and changed years. They've gone back now to the 90s and are changing temperature data, saying now that other years, more recent years, are hotter now than the 1998, which was previously the hottest year, the UN temperature data. So this is all this psychiatric stuff on the heels of them going back, changing the historical record. NASA has been caught now changing and making the 1930s cooler than at current temperatures so they can show a warming trend more pronounced. Imagine if a financial firm on Wall Street went back to the 90s or the 1980s and said, hey, we're going to make our revenues lower back then so we can show more profit over the last 30, 40 years. That's what they're doing. On the heels of all this, what people are calling openly climate fraud, they're now coming in and now going after our brains. They're calling for human engineering. They're calling for genetic alteration, and they're calling for treatment for us mental defectives. This is a movement. You could say it's in its last throes of desperation, but my fear is it's getting into its more solidified phase where they're now getting more and more power, and they're realizing that now is the time to act, and they're really going after any and all dissent from the orthodoxy on this. And this is a very scary time when you see the data being tampered and now major publications in respected global warming activists being treated with respect by both the media, by international conferences, calling for treatment for anyone who disagrees. This is a frightening time in which we live.
And of course, all these top academics and others are saying ration cards, make everybody pay more. We had the Austin City Council say, yeah, we want to increase your power bill by 80%. And they said it's for the earth. You should pay more. No, really, it's for a special consortium connected to Obama that shut down the other power plants who's going to make more money. So, so these foreign corporations come in, cut off our power, and then want to almost double charge us. I mean, it is just, it has nothing to do with it. Look, we know they have these academics that get off on the funding and the power trips and the discussions of, you know, arrest Lord Monckton, you know, kill people, you know, drug us, put us in straitjackets. And I know we laugh at it, but you're right. They've got the power, but above, you know, just kind of the dimwits that are on power trips as, you know, the soldiers of trendiness, above that, who's steering the agenda overall?
Well, this is still very much, you know, Maurice Strong is going to be at this upcoming Rio summit, and I'll be going there. Yes, I'm going to take the sacrifice of going to the beaches of Rio in June to attend this new UN Earth Summit. It's going to be a 20-year follow-up to the abomination that the first George H.W. Bush went to legitimize, agreed the United States, which brought about Agenda 21, which brought about the Kyoto Protocol. We have nothing but the first George Bush to thank for this United Nations legacy. So much of this is emanating from there, from the top of that, and they're going to now roll climate change into species extinction, deforestation, resource extraction. And the United Nations, he who controls carbon controls life. Well, he who controls all aspects of life is going to control life. And that's what the UN is now achieving, striving for. They're going to be with going after species and land use. They're going to be able to control transportation, seaways, agriculture, all the way across the board, much beyond what they were able to do with climate. And they're going to roll climate into this agenda. And this is going to be their next agenda going forward, as climate is going to still be front and center, but they're going to roll it into this, and they're going to expand these other issues because they're having trouble propagandizing because the data isn't there to support global warming. So they're going to mix it in with everything else. And it's a question of, you know, where we stand. Is a President Romney, for example, who's going to be surrounded by all these warmed over George Bush global warming believing people like James Connaughton. Those are who's advising Mitt Romney on on his campaign, former George Bush people who were big United Nations global warming supporters. So we have a frightening scenario. And I would argue, and I'll tell you this, Alex, I'll say this seriously, many of the people I used to work in the Senate with do not agree with me, don't like me saying this. You could almost argue we would be safer with Obama as president in a second term with a united Republican opposition based on partisanship, not principle, than you would be with a Republican like Mitt Romney surrounded with a bunch of people who believe in global warming, and Republicans forced to support him because they, quote, have to support the president and support their team. So there's an argument to be made that a unified opposition based on partisanship is probably the greatest friend of liberty we have, because most of the people on Washington don't go by the
right. No, the founding fathers said gridlock is good. Yeah. It's another form of separation of powers. And it's the big mega banks, some of the special interests, the crony capitalists who are anti-free market, want this planned economy, and they always exempt themselves, like General Electric is, from their own carbon rules that Obama is now bringing back outside of law to start shutting down new ones that were going to be opened and shutting down old ones. And it all comes down to select groups creating artificial scarcity and making bigger profits. Let me ask you this, because
you mentioned coal, yeah.
Well, expand on that point.
Well, the coal thing is huge right now. Obama's EPA is going to be forcing coal plants to have carbon capture and storage. In other words, capturing what we exhale from our mouth. We inhale oxygen, exhale CO2. What the biosphere loves, trees and plants want more CO2, and they're going to be forcing them to do it. What they're going to do is they're going to shut down coal plants. Future coal plants, DOA. Existing coal plants are next to be on the chopping block. We have people like Mayor Bloomberg in New York bragging that his partnership with environmental groups has stopped hundreds of coal plants across the country. Coal is nearly 50% of our electricity. It's the lifeblood of our economy. If a foreign invader were doing what the Obama administration were doing, we'd be up in arms fighting anyone going after the lifeblood of our civilization, which is coal-fired power and oil, carbon-based energy. I repeat it to you again, Alex. One of the greatest liberators of mankind in the history of our planet is carbon energy. President Obama has his science czar and his energy secretary both openly hostile to energy. We have his science czar actually came out and said, John Holdren actually came out and said, we need to deindustrialize the United States. He actually came out and said cheap energy is one of the hazards of a free society. We know Secretary Chu has called for European-style gas prices. We know President Obama said that his plan addresses electricity prices will necessarily skyrocket. I would argue they're very competent. They're doing exactly what they said they wanted to do. This is not a case of, oh, this is an unintended consequence. If only we could explain to President Obama and his administration. No, this is what their stated goal is, and they're achieving their stated goal. What they are doing to our energy, and they've destroyed the American SUV, they've destroyed American automobiles.
It's economic espionage, but it's worse. They're globalists like Maurice Strong, who have moved everything to communist China. They get 3 new plants a week. We don't get 3 a year. It's simple. Right. They've moved everything to China. They're shutting us off. And I say to the environmentalist, I say, hey, if they're building new plants there that don't have any scrubbers, and so the same carbon's going out in the same atmosphere, isn't it good to have it here with you know, some of the reasonable things they put on the last 50 years? And they just will not hear me. I'm like, yeah, okay.
Absolutely. Any coal plants built in the United States are going to be radically improved and much cleaner than previous generation ones. Instead, you're right. They're relocating. It's the same thing with the Keystone Pipeline, others. It's all going to end up going to Asia and other parts of the world that don't have anywhere near the stringent environmental standards that we have. Keep in mind, since 1970, we've radically improved our air and water quality while at the same time increasing our population and economic growth. The two are mutually beneficial. If you look back at the old failed socialist regimes like in Eastern Europe, where they had, you know, the worst technology, the most polluting technology, statism leads to the worst environment. So now we're faced with Obama putting $80 billion in a stimulus, trying to pick winners and losers through the political process, going to worthless waste of money on solar and wind power. Solar and wind competed with carbon-based energy, and they had their asses kicked repeatedly. And now people think, well, if only they had enough money. Well, look at the numbers. No matter how much subsidies they throw into wind and solar, they don't produce the energy that we need. And they actually have major environmental problems. In the Mojave Desert, windmills are the same imprint, same damage to the environment as a mining industry. Solar power is not producing more energy.
Well, that's like these idiots that say electric cars are great and they feel all good about it. It's electricity generated by coal that they're getting in the car, and the windmills don't deliver the power. But again, it's not meant to really work. It's meant to shut down their competition and just give billions to their friends who half the time, as you know, don't even build anything. It's just pure looting.
The Fisker Karma electric car, the luxury car, $100,000, was more than Solandra got. It got, I think Solandra got 527 or 528. This got like $529 million. Al Gore's companies were the ones behind pushing it. It failed its first test with Consumer Reports. The entire car died. This is a boutique vehicle. Hollywood celebrities like Justin Timberlake and Al Gore, the only ones that can afford it. And beyond that, the car is actually made in Finland. So it's not even U.S. jobs. And CBS News, of all places, did the analysis. 80% of these green stimulus funds all came from former Obama campaign donors. This is crony capitalism at its worst. So again, they're taking away our energy. They're going to destroy our economy. At the same time, they're monkeying fraudulently with the global warming data and theory, changing CO2 versus temperature, changing past temperature data, changing what years were hot, what years were cold. At the same time, they're now going after our brains, and they're calling all their opponents mental defectives. This has all the hallmarks of a totalitarian movement.
Well, that was my next question for you. Just growing up, being around these type of academics and people, reading news over the years, I've noticed that it's like a sacrament with liberals, who aren't even really liberals. They're authoritarian control freaks on average, to drug their children. And I've seen statistics that liberals, in some cases 3 to 1, drug their kids, Prozac, Ritalin. They really enjoy it, especially their boys. These liberal mothers enjoy attacking their sons. And you know, that's why I was making the joke about making the boys sit on the toilet. Because, you know, it's not right that they stand up. That makes the women feel bad. This whole anti-male thing. And I see this obsession in schools with drugging the boys, period. So it's this witch-like proclivity, and I see it everywhere where they say drug. You know, we've got to drug people so they're not racist. We've got to drug the water so you behave. We've got to make you do what we want. And I really think it's an army of people who never got invited to the party, an army of people that are so feeble that all they know is the will to power. But they're like nightmare creatures. They're like the goblins that serve the devil in the movie Legend or something. I mean, I just can't describe that. When I look at their photos, they all look the same. They always have this crazy look in their eyes, leering smiles. I know you've noticed it battling them on Capitol Hill. I mean, what is it about these people? I mean, it's like they're space aliens or something.
Well, I interviewed Peter Singer years ago, the Princeton bioethicist. And whenever you hear the word ethicist with a professor, you had to run, because it's usually...
That's the folks saying kill babies up to age 3.
That's right. Yes, he believes that they have the same right, that chimpanzees have more rights than baby humans. And he also talks about how animals can consent to have sexual relations with humans. I mean, this guy is a hero of the intellectual left. And this is the kind of people that pass as their intellectual leaders. And so at some point he says Christianity is harmful to animals. He says all kinds. The wackier they get, the more respect they get. People like Paul Ehrlich, the author of the Overpopulation Bomb, who, as we've talked about on the show, John Lennon made a chump of in the 1970s. John Lennon was right about population, and he didn't have a PhD degree like Paul Ehrlich, and didn't have the international media trumpeting his views. So all of these scientists, the more wrong they are, people like NASA's James Hansen couldn't be more wrong on all his temperature predictions from 20 years ago, the more feted they get. We've seen this even in the NFL. The losing coaches seem to just keep moving from team to team, getting all these lucrative contracts. Never makes any sense. Same thing here with the media coverage of and the respect of these leftists and the intellectual left. No matter how wrong they are, no matter how spectacularly wrong they are. In the case of Paul Ehrlich, he's near 80 years old. He still wins Lifetime Achievement Awards. He gets feted as though he's one of the most intelligent and prescient men of our times. And you can't look at anyone besides he and John Holdren, who have probably been more wrong and more ill-equipped to ever hold the title of PhD. I always say they make a mockery of their PhD, but the more they do it, the more awards and the more respect they get.
In fact, we can put on screen one of those articles where a month or so ago, the big journal of bioethics came out. This is what's replaced the Hippocratic Oath, and said, yeah, kill babies up to 3. Bill Gates says, yeah, go ahead and kill grandma, and we'll hire 10 teachers, and the liberals. And again, they call themselves liberals, all clapped. You know, in the final equation, we're talking to Mark Morano of ClimateDepot.com. When you look at these people, they really are just authoritarians. I don't even think that they really are, in their own minds, liberals. They're not like Thomas Jefferson, who's rolling over in his grave with these people calling themselves liberal. He was a real classical liberal for more freedom. All they do is spew textbook tyranny, but because they walk around in sandals and lisp at people and their eyes don't point the right directions, it's like that's how Dr. Pianka at UT looks like a male version of this woman. Eyes don't point in the right direction, can hardly talk, but walks around lisping, talking about exterminating 90% of humanity, and looks like a troll. And so we're supposed to go, oh, kill me, you're the Superman. I mean, there's something weird about people that look and act like trolls that can hardly talk, always talking about what trash we are. So here's my question, dealing with eugenics. What do you call these people? Because they're not liberals. They're obsessed, as you know, with population control. Everybody's crud but them. The world's too overpopulated. Well, if it's too overpopulated, why don't they do the world a favor? I'm not telling them commit suicide, but before they cut the power off to Africans and literally kill hundreds of millions, you know, the sleeping pills are in the medicine cabinet.
Well, yeah, it's funny. There actually is a movement called the Voluntary Human Extinction Movement. And I think these are people, they actually don't advocate killing themselves. I think they advocate not reproducing, which I don't think a lot of people would have a problem with, given that they have such a misanthropic view of the world. But, you know, you asked if they're just totalitarians. The bottom line is Nancy Pelosi went to China and said we need a complete inventory in every aspect of our lives to combat global warming. UK, you referred to this, has a proposal for a carbon ration card where your employer would monitor your home energy use, your train travel, your airline travel, and if you go over your exceeded amount, you get taxed. If you're under, you get a credit. We have a German climate advisor who's actually come out and wants a CO2 budget for every man, woman, and child on the planet, monitored presumably by international agencies.
No, I got to stop you. I got to stop you. No more single-family homes. And when you mention the airline stuff, they've already begun the global tax. I just want to point out they have the power. They're doing this. That's why they're so arrogant. They're putting the carbon taxes in. They're moving. They got the smart meters. They admit that now will control our houses. I mean,
in California, they openly tried to do that. The government would control your thermostat. And actually, the New York Times said it was like an episode out of Outer Limits. The New York Times actually had some honest.
So who are the? How do we stop these maniacs? I mean, what is their end game?
Well, my problem is, the problem I have is they need real opposition. And if you look at the modern Republican Party today, it's not real opposition to anything they're proposing. And that's why I get so frustrated. It's like, if you could actually oppose these people on principled, ideological, in-their-face grounds, we could achieve victory. Instead, most of this stuff happens behind the scene. We're losing our shower heads, our dishwashers, our washing machines, our toilets, our SUVs, our electricity. All of it's happening mostly through bureaucracies behind the scenes. Republican leaders are mostly silent. People like Mitt Romney have former George Bush advisors who buy into the entire man-made global warming thing and praise the United Nations science. And so I don't know. I mean, we don't have a real opposition party to what is happening there right now at our government. And it's the only thing I can think of is public awareness, and the public has to. That's how we defeated the climate bill. It wasn't even the Tea Parties. It was the town hall meetings. Democrat congressmen went home to their district.
Exactly. And that's where we're turning the tide. So they're getting desperate, saying arrest them, put them in psychiatric facilities, drug them, charge them, because they know we're kicking their butts. So we've come from behind. It's now basically at halftime. In the last 2 minutes, Mark, other points that you think are key for people to know. How do we beat these monsters?
Well, I mean, this is, the brain thing. There's a book out called by Chris Mooney about the Republican brain, and this is a sort of a soft version. They're analyzing what makes conservatives tick, what makes global warming skeptics tick. And by the way, I will note that at Climate Diva, we have a whole report on liberal, left-wing, in many cases anarchist scientists and professors who are absolutely global warming skeptics. So many on the left can't stand it. They actually say this is akin to big state corporatism, and they say that this is a made-up thing of the white upper middle class in the world, the idea of man-made global warming. So many of the left is shedding this, especially the libertarian left. And as we go forward on this, people need to understand this is absolutely a hardcore partisan political movement on one hand when it comes to the science, and frightening totalitarian impulse on the other hand. And we're talking about beyond global governance, beyond the CO2 budget for every man, woman, and child. These things are proposed with the rights for Mother Earth that are coming out of United Nations climate conferences. This is a whole movement afoot. And what it is United Nations and other, we'll call them bureaucratic bean counters, or just the arrogance of central planners. They really think every aspect of our lives need to be managed. This is their arrogance. This is their conceit. It's not like they wake up every day and say, I want to be like Hitler or Stalin, or I want to be a totalitarian. They wake up with actually the capacity to think, if only we could do this, if only we could manage this in this part of our life, we could manage the energy economy, and we could manage this sociological group. And this is how you breed totalitarianism. Even if you don't think that far ahead, or you don't consider yourself one, you're a part of it. And that's what people like Professor Norgaard are very much, or Professor Lau, who wants to do the human engineering. He says, oh, it's voluntary, and this is all going to enhance liberty because we're not forcing anyone to do it. But once you go down that road, nothing's voluntary. How do you even ethically start those kind of experiments? We have a guy named Professor Donald Brown from Stanford, who's a climate ethicist, who says it's now unethical to oppose global warming solutions. We have the United Nations has said it's, quote, criminally irresponsible. This is what they're on record in 2007, criminally irresponsible to deny man-made global warming. These words mean something. When you have Al Gore at the UN conference, I don't know if you recall this, but they were trying to ask him questions. You had armed UN jackbooted thugs stopping people from asking Al Gore questions at the Copenhagen conference in 2009. This is a frightening development. They are in this. This is all in for them, this environment, climate. They're going to be expanding it to species coming up at Rio Summit in June. And I'd love to talk to you from there, Alex. I'll be there for about a week in Rio at this conference. And this is going to be a big to-do because they're going to be doing the shift back to sort of generalized environmental issues and endangered species.
Sure. No, can't wait to see your coverage from that at climatedepot.com. Of course, we'll have you on at Infowars.com and, of course, in the nightly news as well. But, again, when you say you can't find words to describe it, this is happening because the global elite, the big mega banks that are anti-free market, they want a managed economy. And that's why no matter how much they get exposed, they keep moving forward. They just throw out their little, academics as their cannon fodder because they'll stumble forward into the intellectual machine gun fire. But I agree with you. It is time to get people involved against these people because, again, there's like a spirit about them, the way they look, the way they act. And I know you're saying that, well, it's not like they wake up and want to be authoritarian. If you look at the whole environmental movement that they've taken over the last 60 years, as you know, it's always been about global government and authoritarianism. So I think that, that's just their cover. It's just the authoritarianism is coming out now because they love running everything.
Yeah, in fact, Václav Klaus, the president of the Czech Republic, has said it best. With the fall of communism, the greatest threat to human liberty is what he calls ambitious environmentalism. Enough said. He said it. They are the new totalitarians after the communists fell. This is what their mission is. This is what their goal is. And you mentioned all the other scares, no matter what the scare, global cooling, overpopulation, DDT, Amazon rainforest disappearing. Every environmental scare always had the same exact solutions: more government control, more regulations, more limits on human freedom. It didn't matter what the problem was. And that's the irony of this whole thing. It's always about whatever they can get to achieve their ends, and it's about them managing other human beings. It's about the intellectual left doing social engineering and doing economic engineering and natural world engineering and planning and being in charge of everything.
Well, yeah, look at the geoengineering. They say, oh, it's secret, we're doing it, we're going to control the weather. I mean, it's just everything. It's like a comic book bad guy tries to do the stuff they do. It's like, what's a comic book bad guy do? He does A through Z. Well, A through Z, double checked. I got to throw this caveat out because I probably won't talk to you because you're so busy until you get down there to the Maurice Strong UN World Government Conference you're going to be covering. And hopefully you guys don't get roughed up like you and Lord Monckton have before. How is it going with their global carbon tax through the airlines? I know India is saying no, China's saying no. How is it going on their other moves to just put arbitrary taxes on? I mean, it looks to me like the world is starting to figure out this is a scam.
Yeah, in fact, the good news is you mentioned those countries. Australia is bailing out on much of this. Canada just recently is bailing out on this. The United States has completely bailed on the international treaty, even under President Obama. When I say completely, meaning they're just paying it lip service at the moment. So internationally, everything's just ground to a halt. That's why I think this UN summit coming up in Rio is going to try to regenerate everything. And again, this is something Republican presidents have supported. I was at the last one in Johannesburg, South Africa, 2002. President Bush sent Colin Powell. It was his situation. Colin Powell showed up and got booed by the UN audience, while President Mugabe got cheered. The man who was seizing white-owned farms in formerly Zaire in Africa. They were seizing white-owned farms as a sort of reparations for slavery. He was the hero of the UN summit, and Colin Powell was booed as, and I think George Bush should have been himself and ridiculed the conference. The problem is George Bush and his father have all basically bought into most of the—
Well, it was his dad at the 92 conference, right?
Yeah. Yes, it was. And his dad brought us the legacy of Agenda 21. His dad brought us the legacy of the Kyoto Protocol. And, again, it really concerns me about the Republican standard bearer likely to be Mitt Romney that's going to have all of these same Bush advisors surrounding him, and he's already got him as campaign advisor.
ClimateDepot.com, Mark Morano, I'll leave you with this. Good people don't ever stand up till stuff gets really bad. And people are starting to wake up because it's gotten bad. Like you said, they're moving fast. It's going to get a lot worse. In the final equation, no amount of straitjackets and drugs is going to stop us. These people have been exposed for what they are, a bunch of authoritarian bootlickers, and we're going to defeat them. Thank you so much, and good luck down there. Via con Dios when you're down there in Rio.
All right. Thanks a lot, Alex.
Thanks for the time, Mark.
Transition to saying that if you don't agree with them, we're all mental defectives. And that is where this is going. And we're not— this isn't hyperbole. This isn't alarmism. We now have academic papers accepted in peer-reviewed journals by professors at major universities, presented at major international conferences. This is a frightening time that we're living in.
And Mark, words cannot describe it. I mean, how bizarre it is. She says it's racism. I know the EU and England are saying climate denial is Holocaust denial, and they just bring race into it. I remember Obama's people saying, if you're not for government Obamacare, you're racist. I remember seeing a bunch of the different hosts on MSNBC, like Chris Matthews and others. And to someone who is sane, it makes no sense, but they're purely trying to punch buttons and behaving like they're God. They sit up on the mountain and they tell us what we can and can't believe. And they're now having the psychological publications come out and say that you're mentally ill if you don't believe in this. They're really trying to set the stage like Stalin did, arresting his detractors and putting them in mental institutions. Do you think this is going to discredit them, or does that matter because they've got the power structure behind them?
No, they do. And we may sit here and laugh at someone like Professor Norgaard, but Al Gore has made very similar accusations that global warming skeptics are likened to anyone who opposed, civil rights in the 1960s for black people. We have, people at Grist magazine, a major environmental publication, saying that global warming skeptics need Nuremberg-style trials for, quote, the bastards, for us not allowing, quote, solutions to man-made global warming, openly comparing us to Nazis that we need to be persecuted like they did in Nuremberg, in the Nuremberg trials. We have NASA's lead scientists saying it's crimes against humanity, the idea that we're not fighting global warming. We have RFK Jr., who's come out and said global warming skeptics are traitors and treasonous. And this goes on and on. We have state climatologists who are fired because they don't toe the line on this. We have UN scientists who've resigned in disgust. They do not allow dissent. And we've known that for years. But what the new development here is, and it's really getting creepy. It is much deeper than we can even scratch the surface here. We have people like Professor Stephen Running who come out and identified the 5 stages of grief, why global warming skeptics don't accept global warming, that essentially we're in the denial stage because it's such an overwhelming problem. We refuse to accept that life as we know it is coming to an end. They've all put on their amateur psychiatric boxes, and they're now going after,
basically saying the same thing.
Well, this is a lady. She's actually at a big conference in London right now with other sort of globalists discussing global warming and environment and how they're going to be essentially trying to move us toward a global governance in the world. This is a major paper that this Carrie Norgaard has presented. And what she's saying is we need to identify the conservatives, that essentially there's something wrong with our brains and that we need treatment. And this is being immediately compared to, obviously, Stalin, who used to accuse his political opponents of being mentally ill. And we don't know exactly what kind of treatment Carrie Norgaard is proposing, but we do know that Professor Lau of New York University is now coming out and talking about human engineering. This was just a paper from a few weeks prior to her paper. And this follows on a book by a guy named Chris Mooney called The Republican Brain, the conservative brain. He's now looking other mainstream global warming guys who are involved with science bodies in Washington, D.C. that are now being politicized. They're looking at our brains and conservative brains and saying there's something wrong here, and they're trying to analyze it. We actually have a new study out saying that conservatism in general is linked to low brain power. This has all been in the last month, Alex, all these new studies coming out. It's as though the left has decided now to formally and officially
Welcome back to this Monday, April 2nd edition of Infowars Nightly News. Last Friday, we wrote an article that got linked on the Drudge Report, and it also got picked up in literally hundreds of publications. Climate change skeptics are mentally ill and are in need of treatment, I guess re-education. It's not the first time we've heard things like this. We've also seen newspapers call for the arrest of people that don't believe in man-made global warming. We've seen calls for rationing our society. We've seen calls for violence against people who dare even question. Now, at first they said that there was absolute consensus by every scientist on Earth that A, global warming was happening, and B, it was man-made. Now they admit that they've basically engaged in a bunch of fraud, but still it's for the betterment of establishing their global government. Now, there's nobody out there who can chronicle all of their dangerous activities like Mark Morano of ClimateDepot.com, the premier site that chronicles all of this information. And whereas we can laugh at these authoritarians, and sometimes it's funny how openly authoritarian they are, we see it as a joke because we love liberty. Listen, they've got the backing of the power structure, as Mark was pointing out to me here when we were during the break about to come back. And so I want him to elaborate on that, because she isn't just one kook saying this. There's so many examples of governments and academics saying this, that this is the move. They want, quote, green fascism. They've said, well, the public's not listening. We've got to have green fascism. So this is the new authoritarianism. This is the major push by academics, government minions, corrupt corporations. This is the global power grab. They want a global tax. Durbin set that up. And Mark Morano of ClimateDepot.com is here to break down Professor Carrie Norgard, who is running around the world saying that we need to basically be locked up. Mark, thanks for coming on short notice on this. This story's gotten a lot of traction. Why is it getting more attention than the hundreds of other professors